The text came at 11:58 p.m., 18 minutes before midnight, from a phone that had been sitting in an evidence bag in a police property room since 11 that morning. Your son knows I'm still alive. I read it 4 times before I understood I wasn't dreaming. Then I called the number back, and it rang twice, and a recorded voice told me the number was no longer in service. My wife Diane had been dead for 12 hours. Before I explain what that message did to me, I need to tell you about the woman who sent it, or who someone wanted me to think sent it, and about the son the message named, and about how a man who spent 40 years designing bridges that don't fall down ended up spending the worst month of his life, proving that the woman he loved for 34 years didn't die by accident. If you're listening to this while you drive, or while you fold laundry, or while you lie awake at 2 a.m. the way I did for weeks, tell me in the comments where you're from. It helps more than you know. And if this story matters to you, subscribe, because there's a lot more still to tell. My name is Walter Bishop. I'm 63 years old. I spent 4 decades as a structural engineer for the state of Washington, inspecting overpasses and grain elevators and the kind of steel that holds up a town without anyone thinking about it. I retired 2 years ago. Diane retired the year before that, after 31 years teaching second grade at Lincoln Elementary in Spokane. We had a house on Cliff Drive with a garden she'd built stone by stone, a son named Ryan who worked as a paramedic, and had given us a granddaughter named Lily, and a marriage that I would have told you, right up until the morning she died, was the one part of my life that had never needed inspecting. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things. Deanne died on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were her volunteer mornings at the county library, and she never missed them, not in 9 years. That morning she told me she had a headache and was going to stay home instead, lie down for a bit. I kissed her forehead, told her to rest, and drove to the hardware store to pick up caulk for a window we'd been meaning to fix for a month. I was gone 50 minutes. When I came home, our daughter-in-law Ashley's car was in the driveway. I remember thinking that was strange before I understood why. Ashley didn't stop by on weekday mornings. She worked mornings at a real estate office downtown. But there she was, sitting on our front steps with her phone in her hand, and when she looked up at me, her face did something I didn't have a name for yet. Later I would learn to call it relief. "Walter," she said, "I think you need to go inside." Diane was at the bottom of the basement stairs. She'd fallen, they told me later, sometime between when I left and when Ashley arrived. The paramedics who came, 2 of them, both younger than my son, worked on her for 11 minutes before the senior one looked at his watch and said the words I will hear for the rest of my life. Time of death, 11:40 a.m. Blunt force trauma to the back of the skull, consistent with a fall down a wooden staircase. That's what the report said. Consistent with. I didn't know yet how much weight a phrase like that could carry, or how much it could hide. Ashley told the police she'd come by to drop off a casserole dish she'd borrowed weeks earlier, found the front door unlocked, called out, and when nobody answered, walked in and found her mother-in-law at the bottom of the basement stairs. She said she called 911 immediately. The call log backed that up. Everything backed that up. It was, on paper, the kind of accident that happens in 100,000 American homes every year to people who forget that a loose stair tread doesn't care how careful you've always been. I believed it. God help me. For the first several hours, I believed it completely. The funeral was 5 days later, on a gray Saturday with the kind of Spokane drizzle that never quite commits to rain. Riverside Cemetery sits on a hillside above the Spokane River, and I stood at the edge of a fresh grave, holding Diane's reading glasses, which someone had found folded on the kitchen counter and given back to me instead of leaving with her other things, because nobody quite knew what to do with a dead woman's glasses. One of the lenses was cracked, a spiderweb fracture through the left side. I kept turning them over in my hands during the service. Something about that crack bothered me, the way a loose bolt bothers you before you can say exactly why. Diane's glasses had been on the kitchen counter, the police report said, not on her face when she fell. So how had they cracked? I didn't have an answer yet. I put the question away, the way you put away a splinter you can't dig out right now, and I got through the day. People came. Neighbors, women from Diane's book club, half the staff of Lincoln Elementary, men I'd worked with 30 years ago who drove 2 hours to stand in the rain for 20 minutes. Ryan stood beside me the whole service in his dress uniform from the fire department, jaw tight, eyes red. 6-year-old Lily's small hand wrapped around two of his fingers. Ashley stood on his other side in a black dress that looked like it'd come from a boutique, not a closet, sunglasses on despite the clouds. She checked her phone 3 times during the eulogy. I noticed because I was looking for something, anything to look at besides the casket, after the crowd thinned. After the last of the castles for the grieving had been promised and the last hand had been shaken, I found myself alone at the grave with Ryan, while Ashley took Lily to the car. My son looked older than 32 that day. He looked like a man carrying something he didn't have words for. "Dad," he said, "there's something I have to tell you. About Mom, about something I found." Before he could finish, Ashley's voice cut across the grass. "Ryan, we need to go." Lily's cold. She was already walking toward us, sunglasses pushed up into her hair now, and something in her face when she looked at Ryan made him stop talking mid-sentence, the way a man stops walking when he feels ice under his boot. "Later," Ryan said quietly. "I'll call you later, Dad. Tonight." He never got the chance. "I want to tell you about the man by the maple tree, because I've thought about him every day since." About 40 feet from the grave, half shadowed by a big red maple that hadn't started turning yet, stood a man in his late 30s, work boots, canvas jacket, nothing that said funeral. I'd noticed him during the service too, standing at the edge of the gathered crowd, not with anyone, checking his watch twice in a way that had nothing to do with grief. When Ashley's car pulled toward the cemetery gate, the man's hand went to his phone. He typed something. 10 seconds later, I watched Ashley's brake lights flash at the gate, watched the car sit there for a long moment before turning out onto the road. I didn't know his name yet. I would learn it soon enough. Derek Cole. And I would learn that he'd known my wife's basement stairs a lot better than a stranger should. I drove home from the cemetery with Diane's cracked glasses on the passenger seat and a version of my son's unfinished sentence looping in my mind. "There's something I have to tell you. About Mom." I told myself it was nothing, that grief makes a person want to say something, anything that feels like it matters. I told myself a lot of things that week that turned out to be lies I'd built for myself out of exhaustion and love. That night, alone in the house for the first time in 34 years, I sat at the kitchen table and didn't eat the casserole a neighbor had left. I looked at the basement door. I hadn't gone down there since the paramedics carried Diane's body up. I wasn't ready. I told myself tomorrow, at 11:58 p.m., my phone buzzed on the table. "I want you to understand what it meant to see her name on the screen." Diane's contact photo, a picture from 3 summers ago at the lake. Her laughing at something off camera, hair loose, sunburned across the nose. Her name, her number, a text message sitting there glowing in a dark kitchen like something that shouldn't exist. "Your son knows I'm still alive." I sat very still for a long time. My hands, which had been steady through the entire funeral, through shaking 200 hands and thanking 200 people for their sorry for your loss, started to shake now in an empty kitchen. At midnight alone, I called the number. Disconnected. I called it again 10 minutes later. The same recorded voice, flat and indifferent, told me the number you have dialed is no longer in service. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the table with my late father's old grid notebook, the one I'd used for 40 years to sketch load calculations and stress diagrams, and I wrote down everything I could remember from the last 2 weeks of Diane's life. The headache that kept her home from the library, the way she'd started closing her laptop quickly whenever I walked into the study, a phone call I'd overheard the tail end of, 10 days before she died, Diane's voice low and urgent, saying, "I have proof, and if anything happens to me, he'll find it." Before she noticed me in the doorway and hung up fast, smiling too brightly, saying it was just her sister, being dramatic about a property dispute. Diane didn't have a sister. I sat with that notebook until sunrise, and somewhere around 4 in the morning, the engineer in me, the part of my brain that had spent 4 decades finding the hairline crack that brings down a whole structure, took over from the grieving husband. I stopped asking why this had happened to me. I started asking what the evidence actually showed, the cracked glasses on the kitchen counter, not on her face. A basement fall with a time of death of 11:40 in a house I'd left at 10:50 and hadn't returned to until 11:41, according to my own hardware store receipt, which meant there was a window, a narrow window, when my wife had been alone in that house with someone who wasn't me. Ashley's convenient arrival, with a casserole dish nobody remembered lending her. A man under a maple tree who didn't belong at a funeral and controlled my daughter-in-law's driving with a single text message. A phone call about proof, 10 days before Diane died. And now this. A text from a dead woman's phone at midnight, naming my son. I thought about calling the police right then. I picked up my landline twice and put it down twice. Something stopped me, and it wasn't fear, it was arithmetic. If someone had gone to the trouble of staging an accident, this cleanly, cracking a lens, timing a casserole visit, they had also gone to the trouble of thinking through what a grieving husband would do next. A call to the police with nothing but a broken lens and a burner phone text would get filed sympathetically as the confused grief of a man who just lost his wife. I needed more than suspicion. I needed what Diane herself had apparently been building before she died. Proof. I thought about the word she'd used on that phone call. He'll find it. Not the police. Not a lawyer. Me, at 6 in the morning, exhausted, wired on cold coffee, I finally forced myself down the basement stairs, one hand gripping the railing so hard my knuckles went white. 14 steps, the same 14 steps Diane had climbed 1,000 times to do laundry, store Christmas decorations, keep the sewing machine she never used enough. I stood at the bottom and made myself look, really look, the way I'd trained myself to look at a compromised beam. The 10th step from the bottom had a hairline split in the wood along the grain, fresh, pale against the older stained wood around it, the kind of split you get from sudden pressure, not decades of wear. I knelt and photographed it with my phone. Above it, at eye level for someone descending, a single screw was backed halfway out of the handrail bracket, just enough to make the rail flex if you grabbed it hard in a fall. Just enough. I am a man who spent 40 years reading structures for the lies they tell when something has been done to them on purpose. That handrail was screaming at me. I went back upstairs, and I called the one person I could think of who might actually tell me the truth, instead of a comforting story. Carol Denning. Diane's closest friend since they'd taught across the hall from each other at Lincoln Elementary for 20 years. Carol answered on the second ring, her voice thick with her own grief, and when I asked if I could come by, she went quiet for a second, too long before she said yes. I found her waiting on her porch when I pulled up, a small wooden box in her lap, the kind Diane used to keep buttons and old photographs in. Carol's eyes were red and her hands were shaking worse than mine had been the night before. She gave me this 3 weeks ago, Carol said, before I'd even reached the steps. Made me promise. She said, if anything ever happens to me, anything at all, even if it looks like an accident, you give this to Walter and only Walter, and you tell him not to trust anyone until he's seen everything inside. Carol's voice cracked. I told her she was scaring me. She said, good. Someone should be scared, because I finally understand what I found. She handed me the box. Inside, wrapped in one of Diane's cardigans, the soft blue one she wore every October, was a small external hard drive and an envelope with my name written in her handwriting, the same handwriting I'd been reading love notes in since 1991. I drove home with that box on the passenger seat where her cracked glasses had sat the night before, and I understood, somewhere in my chest, that the woman I'd married had spent her last weeks alive building a case against her own death, the way I used to build a case for why a bridge needed to close before it fell down on its own. She had seen the crack coming, she had tried to warn me, and somewhere between her warning and this morning, someone had made sure she never got the chance to say it out loud. In my study, door locked, curtains drawn against a gray Spokane morning, I opened Diane's letter first. Her handwriting was tighter than usual, rushed in places, like she'd written it in stolen minutes between other things. Walter, if you're reading this, then I was right to be afraid. And I am so sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I didn't want to believe it myself. I started noticing things in June, Money moving out of the trust account faster than it should, a life insurance policy on me that I never signed, updated beneficiary paperwork with my forged signature. I confronted Ashley about the money in August, and she laughed it off as a misunderstanding. Then I found out about her and a man named Derek Cole, and I understood it wasn't a misunderstanding at all. I've been documenting everything since September. It's all on this drive: videos, financial records, messages. I was going to bring it to a lawyer next week once I was certain. I ran out of time to be certain. Trust the evidence, not your grief. And Walter, watch over Ryan. I think he found something too, something small, and I don't think he understands yet how dangerous that is. Tell him to be careful before you tell him anything else. I love you. I always did. D. I plugged the drive into my laptop with hands that had finally stopped shaking, because grief had given way to something colder and more useful. 5 folders appeared on the screen: video, audio, financial, insurance, messages. I clicked the first video. The footage was grainy, angled down from somewhere near the ceiling of what I recognized immediately as our own guest bedroom, the one that faced the garden, time-stamped 6 weeks before Diane died. Ashley walked into frame, first checking her phone, and a moment later Derek Cole followed her in, the same man who'd stood under the maple tree at the funeral. And the way they moved around each other in that room told me everything the timestamp hadn't already confirmed. I turned up the volume, and I heard my daughter-in-law's voice, casual, almost bored, the way you'd discuss a grocery list. She's not going to just hand it over, Derek. Diane's already suspicious about the account transfers. If she talks to Ryan before we're ready, this whole thing falls apart. Then we don't give her the chance, Derek said. I've done insurance claims work for 11 years. I know exactly how these things get investigated, and I know exactly how they don't. A woman her age, wet basement stairs, loose handrail, nobody looks twice. Especially if her own husband's the one who finds her. Ashley laughed, and it was that laugh, more than anything else on that drive, more than the forged signature or the secret policy or the whispered plan, that I have never been able to forget. Light, easy. The laugh of someone already spending money that wasn't hers yet. 2 million, she said. Split 50-50, once the trust clears and I get Ryan to sign off on the estate. He trusts me completely. He has no idea. I sat alone in my study at 7 in the morning, with the sound of my daughter-in-law planning my wife's murder still hanging in the air, and I understood that whatever came next in my life, whatever it cost me, I was not going to let this woman finish laughing. I made myself watch it 3 more times that morning, not because I needed convincing, but because an engineer doesn't sign off on a structural failure from a single glance. I needed every detail cataloged before grief could talk me into a mistake I couldn't undo. The second video was shorter, filmed from the same hidden angle 2 weeks later. Ashley sat at what I recognized as Diane's own laptop in Diane's own study, filling out a supplemental life insurance application, $2 million, on top of the modest policy Diane and I had carried for decades. The camera caught the screen clearly enough to read the signature line, and I watched my daughter-in-law practice my wife's handwriting on a scrap of paper 3 times before she committed it to the form, comparing each attempt against an old birthday card of Diane's she'd apparently brought along as a reference. The third video was the one that told me this had never been a crime of opportunity. Derek Cole, in work clothes, standing in our own basement, filmed, I would later understand, from a small camera Diane had hidden inside an old smoke detector casing on the stairwell ceiling, the same detector I'd meant to replace the batteries in for 2 months, and never had. That third step from the bottom is already a little loose, Derek said, crouched down, running a gloved hand along the tread. Nobody's going to think twice about a woman her age losing her footing on old stairs. I'll come back the night before, split the wood a little more, back off this screw in the handrail bracket just enough that it gives when she grabs it hard. She goes down, hits her head on the concrete edge at the bottom, and that's it. Blunt trauma, consistent with an accidental fall. I've read 100 of these reports. Nobody looks past accidental, unless somebody gives them a reason to. I paused the recording and sat with my hands flat on the desk. The way I used to steady myself before signing off on a bridge inspection, I knew was going to close a road and make somebody's week worse. Except this time, the structure that had failed was my family, and the somebody was my wife. And there was no version of this where I got to walk away and let another engineer handle it. The audio folder held 4 phone calls, the last one recorded 9 days before Diane died. Her own voice was on it, calm, deliberately calm in the way she talked to second graders who were about to cry, asking Ashley directly about a withdrawal from the trust account. Ashley's answers were smooth, rehearsed, the kind of smooth that only comes from having said the lie before. When Diane pushed harder, Ashley's tone shifted, just slightly, just enough that I recognized it now for what it had actually been. Not defensiveness, calculation. The financial folder was the part that made my stomach turn the way the videos hadn't. Diane and I had built a family trust 15 years ago, modest but solid, meant to help Ryan and Lily someday, meant to cover Diane's mother's care before she passed, meant to be the quiet, boring safety net that responsible people build and then mostly forget about. Ashley had been managing the trust's paperwork for the past 2 years, a task she'd volunteered for after Diane's arthritis made typing hard, framed as a kindness, a daughter-in-law helping out. In that time, $41,000 had moved out of the trust in transfers Diane had never authorized. A home equity loan had been taken against Ashley and Ryan's house, with Diane's forged signature as a co-signer, $62,000, drained within 3 weeks of disbursement. And underneath all of it, the insurance folder held the real number, a $2 million policy on my wife's life, application dated 4 months before her death, beneficiary listed as Ryan Bishop with a secondary, quieter document, a post-nuptial financial agreement Ashley had drawn up and gotten Ryan to sign 8 months ago without either of us knowing, one that would give Ashley full control of any inheritance funds for family financial planning purposes in the event of Diane's death. My son didn't know any of this. I want to be clear about that, because for about 6 hours that morning I let myself wonder, and I am ashamed of those 6 hours now. But Diane's letter had already told me the truth, and the messages folder confirmed it in Ashley's own words. Texted to Derek 2 weeks before the murder. Ryan still doesn't suspect anything. He trusts me completely. Once this clears, he won't even ask questions. He'll just be grieving. My son wasn't a conspirator. He was a resource. A grieving, trusting, useful resource, being managed the same way you'd manage a difficult client. But there was one message in that folder, dated 6 days before Diane died, that stopped me cold. Ryan, texting his mother, not Ashley. Mom, found something weird going through old bank statements for Lily's college fund. A loan I don't remember taking out. Can we talk this weekend? Just the 2 of us? Diane never answered that text. She died before the weekend came. Your son knows I'm still alive. I finally understood what that phrase had meant. Sitting alone in a dark kitchen the night of the funeral, a message sent from a scheduling app Diane had apparently set up on her own phone weeks earlier. The kind of dead man's switch a careful, frightened woman builds when she suspects she might not get the chance to say something out loud. It wasn't a message from a ghost, and it wasn't literal. It was Diane's last piece of engineering, a coded flare meant to fire automatically if she went silent for too long, worded strangely on purpose, so that if the wrong person ever intercepted it, it would read as confusion rather than confession. Still alive meant the truth was still alive, still findable, still hers to hand to me from beyond the moment they'd taken from her. And your son knows was a warning, not an accusation. Ryan had stumbled onto the money trail on his own, innocently, dangerously, 6 days before his mother died, and Diane wanted me to understand, the instant it mattered most, that my son might be standing closer to the blast radius than either of us knew. I thought about calling Ryan right then. I picked up my phone and put it down twice, the same way I had the police line the night before. Diane's letter had told me to be careful before I told him anything, and I understood why the moment I pictured it. If Ryan confronted Ashley with what he now knew, if his face gave away that his father had shown him a hard drive full of murder, Ashley and Derek would have every reason in the world to move fast, cover faster, and disappear with whatever was left of $2 million before anyone with a badge ever got involved. I needed Ryan safe, and I needed him ignorant just a little longer, and those 2 needs were pulling in directions that made my chest ache, worse than the grief had. I spent the rest of that day doing what I'd trained myself to do for 4 decades. When a structure showed signs of failure, I documented everything redundantly, obsessively. I copied the drive's contents to my own laptop, to an external backup, to a cloud account I created that morning under an alias. I printed the financial records and the message threads and laid them out across my drafting table in the study the way I used to lay out stress diagrams, dates on one axis, dollar amounts on another, red string in my head connecting a withdrawal here to a text message there. By midnight, I had built a timeline that ran from June, when Ashley first started moving money, to the Tuesday morning 11 days later when my wife died on her own basement stairs. The next morning I drove downtown, dressed in the same slacks I'd worn to bury her, and walked into the FBI field office on West Riverside without calling ahead. I'd learned enough in one sleepless night to know that insurance fraud over $100,000 crosses into federal jurisdiction, and that a man who shows up in person with organized evidence gets taken more seriously than one who calls a tip line and hangs up scared. The receptionist's polite boredom disappeared the moment I wrote evidence of homicide and insurance fraud on the visitor log. 15 minutes later, I was sitting across a table from Special Agent Denise Marsh, mid-40s, sharp-eyed, a legal pad already out before I'd finished sitting down. "Tell me why you're here, Mr. Bishop," she said. I told her everything, in order, the way I'd have presented findings to a state review board. My wife's death, ruled accidental. The cracked glasses that had no business being cracked, the handrail screw, the split wood, the hidden camera and a smoke detector my wife had installed herself, the midnight text from a dead woman's phone. The box Carol Denning had carried for 3 weeks, waiting for a promise to come due. I laid the hard drive on the table between us, along with a printed chain of custody form I'd drafted myself at 2 a.m, and Agent Marsh's eyebrows rose slightly when she saw it. "You built this yourself?" "I spent 40 years making sure structures didn't fail without someone knowing exactly why," I said. "This isn't so different." She played the videos. She read the financial records. 40 minutes in, she looked up at me with an expression I recognized because I'd worn it myself the day before, the look of someone watching a comfortable version of the world come apart. "Mr. Bishop, this is one of the most thoroughly documented private investigations I've seen walk through that door. But I need you to hear me clearly. From this point forward, you do not contact Ashley Bishop. You do not contact Derek Cole. You do not confront anyone, and you do not tell your son what you know until we tell you it's safe. If either of them senses they've been discovered, they will destroy evidence, flee, or worse. Do you understand?" "I understand," I said. But my son texted his mother 6 days before she died, telling her he'd found a loan on Lily's college account that he didn't remember taking out. If they find out he's still asking questions, then we move faster than they expect. Marsh said, "Let me worry about Ryan's exposure. I need you to trust the process, and I need you to keep behaving exactly like a grieving widower who has no idea what happened to his wife." "Can you do that?" I thought about Diane's laugh at the lake, sunburned and easy, 3 summers gone. I thought about a screw backed halfway out of a handrail bracket in the house where my son had learned to walk. "I buried people I loved my whole life without falling apart in public," I said. "I can grieve quietly while I wait." Marsh kept the original drive for forensic processing. I kept my copies tucked into a safety deposit box that afternoon, along with a duplicate set for my attorney, an estate lawyer named Carla Whitfield I'd hired the same week, not for the criminal case, but because Diane's will contained a clause I hadn't fully understood until Carla read it aloud to me in her downtown office 2 days later, in the event of my death under circumstances later found suspicious by law enforcement, or if my daughter-in-law is found to have acted against the interests of this family's finances or safety, I direct that guardianship provisions and trust oversight for my granddaughter Lily Bishop shall pass. If my son is unable or deemed unfit to serve, to my husband Walter Bishop. Carla looked up from the document, glasses pushed down her nose. "Your wife updated this 4 months ago, Walter. She was already protecting Lily before any of this became evidence. This is enforceable, And given what you've just told me about a federal investigation, it may become very relevant very fast. I hadn't told her about the FBI yet. I told her then, everything, because I'd learned in 48 hours that redundancy wasn't just an engineer's habit anymore. It was survival. That evening my phone rang. Ashley's name on the screen, and I answered it standing in my kitchen with my heart hammering harder than it had any right to for a simple phone call. "Walter, I wanted to check in," she said, her voice arranged into something soft and sympathetic. "How are you holding up? I know it's been a hard week." "I'm managing," I said, and made myself sound smaller than I felt. "Just trying to get through the days. Ryan and I were thinking, maybe it would help if we handled some of Diane's estate paperwork for you. Take that off your plate. You shouldn't have to deal with lawyers and accounts right now, not on top of everything else." I understood, in that moment, exactly what Agent Marsh had meant about behaving like a man with no idea what had happened. Every instinct in me wanted to tell this woman I knew precisely what she'd done in my basement, precisely what a $2 million insurance policy was worth to her, precisely what her own recorded voice sounded like discussing my wife's murder over a hidden camera she never knew existed. Instead, I let my voice crack, just slightly, the way grief actually does crack a man. "That's kind of you, Ashley. I might take you up on that." "Of course," she said, and I could hear, underneath the sympathy, something lighter, something almost pleased. "Whatever you need." I hung up and sat down hard at the kitchen table, my hands finally shaking again, not from fear this time, but from the effort of sounding harmless to the woman who had killed my wife, and was already circling what she believed was an unguarded inheritance. 3 days later, Agent Marsh called with an update that changed the shape of everything. "We've frozen the insurance payout pending investigation," she said. "The company flagged the policy the moment we contacted them. A $2 million rider taken out 4 months before an accidental death draws automatic scrutiny once federal agents come asking. Ashley and Derek Cole have no idea yet. But Mr. Bishop, there's something else. We pulled Derek Cole's employment history. He's a licensed insurance claims adjuster, which explains how he knew exactly what an investigator would and wouldn't flag. And we found phone records placing him near your house at 2 in the morning, the night before your wife died." "The night he loosened the handrail," I said. "We believe so. We're building toward warrants. But these things take time to do properly, time we can't rush without risking the whole case falling apart in court. I need you to keep holding the line. A few more weeks. A few more weeks." I hung up the phone and looked at the basement door. Still shut. Still unopened except for that one photographed morning. And I thought about my son's unfinished sentence at the cemetery, and about Lily's small hand wrapped around 2 of Ryan's fingers. And I understood that a few more weeks was going to feel like the longest stretch of my life. I didn't yet know that Ashley was about to make a mistake that would speed everything up, or that the next threat against my family wouldn't come by phone. The mistake came 4 days later, and it came from Ashley, not Derek, which Agent Marsh later told me was almost always how these things unraveled. The planner grows careless the moment she believes she's already won. I was in my study going over Diane's garden records, of all things, trying to remember which bulb she'd meant to plant that fall when my phone rang. "Ryan, Dad, Ashley just filed something. Emergency guardianship. For Lily. She had me sign paperwork this morning. Said it was about protecting our finances while the estate settles. Said with everything going on, I'm too stressed to handle the accounts right now, and it'd be better if she had sole authority over anything involving Lily's college trust and the family assets until things settle down. I signed it because she had it in front of me before my shift and I was half asleep, and now I can't stop thinking about it. Dad, something feels wrong. I don't know what, but something feels wrong." I sat very still, gripping the phone, my son's voice on the other end, sounding exactly like a man standing on a bridge deck that was starting very quietly to hum in a way it shouldn't. "Ryan," I said, "I need you to come to my house tonight, just you. Don't tell Ashley you're coming. Can you do that?" "Dad, you're scaring me." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry. Just come." I called Agent Marsh the second I hung up. She was quiet for a long moment. "She's trying to lock down control of the assets before we move," Marsh finally said. That guardianship filing gives her legal standing over Lily's trust and functionally leverage over Ryan's decisions if things get complicated later. It also tells me she's spooked. Something's made her nervous, and nervous people move fast and sloppy. Mr. Bishop, I think it's time. Bring your son to us tomorrow morning. Ryan arrived at 8 that night, still in his paramedic uniform, exhaustion carved into his face. I sat him down at the kitchen table where his mother and I had eaten 10,000 meals, and I told him. All of it. The stairs, the camera and the smoke detector, the videos, the forged signature, the insurance policy his wife had taken out on his mother, without his knowledge, the loan against Lily's college fund. I watched my son's face go through something I hope I never have to watch again. Disbelief cracking into horror, cracking into a kind of grief that had nothing to do with the funeral we'd already had. Because now he was grieving the wife he thought he had, at the same time he was grieving his mother all over again, with the added unbearable knowledge of exactly how she died and exactly who had planned it. The text, Ryan said finally. Hoarse, about Lily's college fund. I texted Mom about it 6 days before she died. Dad, did that get her killed? Did I? No, I said, and I made him look at me. You found a thread they were already trying to hide. It didn't create the danger. It just meant your mother was running out of time to protect you from it before they got to her first. She knew. She left me a letter telling me to watch over you. She was trying to protect you with her last weeks alive, Ryan. Don't you dare turn that into your fault. He didn't sleep at his own house that night. Neither of us slept much at mine. The next morning we walked into the FBI field office together, and Agent Marsh took Ryan's statement personally, gentle in a way I hadn't seen from her before, walking him through the post-nuptial agreement he'd signed without understanding, the guardianship filing from the day before the college fund loan. When he asked her the same question he'd asked me, could Ashley really have done this? Marsh didn't soften it. Mr. Bishop, based on the evidence your father brought us, yes. We believe your wife, working with Derek Cole, planned and carried out the murder of your mother for insurance proceeds and has spent the past several days trying to consolidate financial control before we could act. I need you to go home tonight and behave normally. Can you do that for Lily's sake for one more night? Ryan's jaw worked. I can do that. 2 nights later, the threats started, and they came for me first. A blocked number, 11:40 at night. The same time I noticed later, as Diane's time of death, which Marsh said was almost certainly not a coincidence, but a message, the kind of cruelty that comes from someone who thinks they're still in control. A man's voice, rough, unhurried. You should have let your wife rest in peace, old man. Some things are better left as accidents. I recorded it the way Marsh had instructed me to record any contact, and I said only, "This call is being recorded," before he hung up. 2 more calls came over the following week, each one a little more specific, each one naming something only someone watching my house closely could have known. The time I left for the grocery store, the make of my truck, the fact that Lily had started staying with me 2 nights a week while Ryan worked overnight shifts. Marsh traced enough of the tower pings to confirm what none of us doubted. Derek Cole, the final threat arrived under my doormat. No phone this time. A plain white envelope slid there sometime before dawn, caught for 4 seconds on my new doorbell camera by a figure in a hooded jacket whose face never turned toward the lens. Inside, block letters cut from what looked like a magazine, glued to a sheet of copy paper. Drop it or the little girl loses both parents. I called Marsh before I'd even finished reading it twice. They just threatened my granddaughter, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt, because underneath the fear was something harder now. Something that had been building in me since a maple tree and a text message and a screw-backed, halfway out of a handrail bracket. How much longer, Denise? Not long, she said, and for the first time I heard urgency in her voice too. A threat against a minor accelerates everything. I can get warrants signed by tomorrow. Keep Lily with you tonight. Don't let her out of your sight. They executed the arrests at 6 the following morning. I know this because Marsh called me at 6:14 and told me it had gone clean, no injuries, both suspects in custody. Ashley was taken from the real estate office parking lot before her first showing of the day. Derek Cole was arrested at a job site in Coeur d'Alene, 20 minutes into loosening the bolts, ironically enough. On a rental property deck he was supposed to be inspecting, not sabotaging. By 7, the local news was already running it. Spokane woman, boyfriend arrested in insurance fraud death investigation. I watched it with Lily asleep upstairs in the guest room and Ryan sitting beside me on my couch, both of us silent, watching his wife's booking photo appear on the screen where his mother's obituary photo had run 11 days earlier. The federal case moved through the following months with the kind of grinding, patient thoroughness that Marsh had promised. There was, in the meantime, a smaller battle to fight in King County. No, Spokane County, family court, because Ashley's own guardianship filing had left a legal tangle around Lily that needed cleaning up, and because Ashley's attorney, before she was fired and replaced twice, tried briefly to argue that Ryan, under significant emotional distress, was not fit to retain full custody either, an argument that collapsed the moment Carla Whitfield produced Diane's will and a stack of federal evidence photocopies. The judge granted Ryan full custody with no restrictions, and granted me, formally, the standing guardian designation Diane had built into her will months before any of us knew we'd need it, should Ryan ever require support. Lily stayed mostly with her father from that point on, but she spent most weekends at my house too. In the garden Diane had built stone, learning the names of the bulbs her grandmother never got to plant that fall, because I planted them for her instead. The trial began in February, 7 months after Diane died. I sat in the gallery of the federal courthouse in Spokane every day it ran, Ryan beside me most of those days. Lily kept far away from all of it by agreement between us. The prosecution built its case exactly the way Diane herself had built her evidence file, methodically, redundantly, in a way that left almost nothing for the defense to work with. The videos played on courtroom monitors to a jury that flinched, more than once, at the casualness in Ashley's voice, as she discussed her mother-in-law's death like a line item. The audio of Derek Cole describing exactly how he'd weaken a handrail bracket to look like ordinary wear played twice, once for the prosecution and once, unsuccessfully, for a defense attorney trying and failing to argue it had been taken out of context. The defense strategies collapsed into each other within the first week. Ashley's attorney argued Derek Cole had manipulated a grieving, vulnerable woman. Derek's attorney argued Ashley had masterminded everything and used him. By the second week, they weren't fighting the prosecution anymore. They were fighting each other, and I watched two people who had planned my wife's death over pillow talk in my own guest bedroom turn on one another in open court, with the same casual cruelty they'd once aimed at Diane. I testified on the 9th day of trial. I told the jury about a cracked lens on a kitchen counter, about a screw backed halfway out of a handrail bracket, about a wife who spent her last weeks alive hiding evidence for a husband she hoped would find it in time to matter. I told them about a midnight text from a phone that was sitting, at that exact moment, in an evidence locker. I want to be precise about that message. I told the prosecutor when she asked me to explain it, because precision had been my whole working life and I owed Diane that much accuracy even now. It wasn't a message from beyond the grave. It was a scheduled alert she'd built herself, weeks in advance, worded so that if the wrong hands ever intercepted it, it would look like nothing more than the confused grief of a man who'd just lost his wife. She was still protecting me and protecting our son, even after she was already gone. That message was the last thing my wife ever engineered, and it worked exactly the way she designed it to. The jury deliberated for 9 hours across 2 days. When the foreperson read the verdicts, guilty on all 14 counts for Ashley, guilty on 12 for Derek Cole, murder in the first degree standing at the center of both. Ashley made a sound I won't try to describe, and Derek stared at the table in front of him and didn't move at all. I felt no triumph sitting there. I felt the particular exhaustion of a man who has finally set down something heavy he's been carrying so long, his arms forgot how to hang normally at his sides. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. 25 years to life for Ashley, running consecutively with the fraud and conspiracy counts, no possibility of parole before Lily would be well into her 30s. Derek Cole received a nearly identical sentence. The frozen insurance payout, once the fraud was confirmed in court, was formally denied by the carrier and the underlying policy voided, and what remained of the drained trust was restored. Through the estate proceedings, Carla handled with the same patience Diane had once brought to a room full of second graders, into an account that will pay for Lily's education exactly the way her grandmother always intended, back before any of this began, back when the worst thing any of us worried about was a loose stair tread we kept meaning to fix. I took Lily to Riverside Cemetery on a bright afternoon in early June, almost a year to the day since I'd stood there in the rain holding a pair of cracked reading glasses I didn't understand yet. The headstone was in place now, permanent, Diane's name cut deep into granite the way I'd once imagined it would be, back before I knew how much work would stand between that gray Saturday and this quiet one. Lily carried daisies, her grandmother's favorite, and set them carefully in the little stone vase Diane had picked out herself, decades ago, for someone else's grave, never imagining it would someday hold her own name. "Grandpa," Lily said, small hand slipping into mine the way it had at the funeral, wrapped around 2 fingers instead of the whole hand, because that was still all her hand could manage. "Do you think Grandma knows we caught them?" I knelt down to her height, the way Diane used to kneel to talk to her second graders, patient and unhurried, like there was nothing in the world more important than the question a child had just asked. "I think she's the reason we caught them," I said. "She left me everything I needed, sweetheart. All I had to do was be careful enough to find it." We stood there a while longer in the June sun, an old engineer and a little girl, in front of a stone that marked the end of the worst year of my life, and, somehow, the beginning of whatever came after it. On the drive home, Lily fell asleep in her car seat before we'd even left the cemetery road, safe, unafraid, 31 years of second-grade patience, already quietly at work in the way I was learning, one day at a time, to raise her. Diane used to say that the strongest structures aren't the ones that never crack. They're the ones built with enough redundancy that a single crack can't bring the whole thing down. She spent her last weeks alive building exactly that kind of redundancy into her own death, so that even after they took her, there was still enough of her left standing to save the rest of us. I kept my promise to her, in the end. I found what she left me. I made sure it mattered. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you were listening from. To hear the next story, click the video on the left. Thank you for watching.